For decades, governments around the world have investigated UFO sightings. But just how are these top-secret studies conducted? Who is called upon to analyze the evidence? And why do many of these governments deny that they study UFOs?
If a senior officer says, don't talk about UFOs, that's an order. And all sorts of adverse consequences will befall anyone who disobeys that.
Join us as we reveal how governments officially investigate unidentified flying objects and uncover why they keep it a secret. A global effort has begun. Secret files hidden from the public for decades, detailing every UFO account, are now available to the public. We are about to uncover the truth behind these classified documents. Find out what the government doesn't want you to know. Alien Files, Unsealed. Exposing the biggest secret on planet Earth. Despite constant denials, governments around the world do study UFOs.
I joined the British government's Ministry of Defence in 1985, and I left in 2006. My job was to research and investigate UFOs. I had mixed feelings when I joined the UFO project. On the one hand, I was fairly skeptical about this. When I looked at some of the extraordinary radar visual cases, I soon began to realize that my initial skepticism had been misplaced.
The United States government, among others, has formed many UFO investigative units dating back to the 1940s. After an unprecedented wave of UFO sightings in 1947, which includes the infamous Roswell incident, the U.S. created investigative bodies, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and ran Project Blue Book until it was canceled in 1969.
In July of 1947, headlines were printed that showed that a flying saucer, alien in nature, complete with bodies and all, crashed on a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico.
The United States Air Force became convinced the nation was being invaded by an unknown advanced technology. And in the fall of 1948, one of the military's own had an encounter that was too convincing to ignore. Unsealed case file, the Gorman dogfight. Fargo, North Dakota, October 1st, 1948. Veteran World War II pilot Lieutenant George Gorman is flying his Air National Guard P-51 Mustang over Fargo on a clear night.
He encounters an object. It's 6 to 8 inches in diameter, he describes it. It's well lit, it's a lit ball of light, and it's flying around the town just like he is.
Several other personnel at the base also witness the ball of light and describe it as bright, with tight edges. Gorman obtains permission to investigate the unidentified object.
He decides to engage him, and it starts playing with him. He has a few head-on passes with it. He tries to chase it around. It does things that he can't keep up with, and then eventually just takes off and he is gone. He
estimated that this object was flying at least 500 miles per hour, which was incredibly fast for the time. They were doing what they could describe as dogfight-type maneuvers in the sky, chasing each other.
Within hours of the incident, officers arrive from Project Sign, the U.S. government's official UFO investigative body at the time. During his interview, Gorman describes the ball of light as bright, with clear edges, not completely round, but slightly flat. Then he stuns investigators by stating that the unidentified object's movements were so specific and responsive that there was, quote, thought behind the UFO's maneuvers.
His report was considered very highly credible. He's a credible officer. So what was this thing? Nobody really knew. What he knew was he couldn't keep up with it, and it did things that he had never encountered before.
After a full investigation and national media coverage, Project Sign concludes that Gorman chased a weather balloon.
The incident with Gorman was not a lone case. There are quite a few examples in our UFO history that show that pilots do have encounters with UFOs.
After investigation, Most cases did turn out to have conventional explanations, and I was able to explain them in terms of people misidentifying aircraft lights, weather balloons, satellites, meteors, airships, all manner of objects and phenomena. Perhaps in as many as 80% of cases, I was able to find a clear explanation.
The question is, what exactly did Gorman encounter in the skies above North Dakota? Despite Project Sign's official 1948 findings, experts in the UFO community consider the Gorman dogfight to be unresolved.
Many experts now look at the documents and say, well, they really weren't doing their job as true investigators. They were collecting these reports, analyzing them, and pretty much dismissing them one at a time. Weather balloon here, swamp gas there, the planet Venus over here. And they were just completely dismissing anything that came in.
Coming up, we uncover one of the most heavily investigated and confounding mass UFO sightings in European history. Alien Files Unsealed. Many times, official government UFO investigations are stamped top secret. And history shows that they can also be influenced by political agendas and controversial analyses. But what about the UFO sightings that have compelling evidence, credible witnesses, and corroborated data? Nick Pope's work for Britain's UFO department gave him inside knowledge of the rarest type of UFO encounter.
In 5% of cases, or thereabouts, they were categorized as genuine unknowns. Now, of course, unknown does not necessarily mean, as the pop culture understanding is, extraterrestrials, but neither could we, or did we, rule out that possibility. Unknown means unknown. Nothing more, nothing less.
Unsealed case file, the Belgium Wave. Eupen, Belgium, November 29th, 1989. A host of triangular UFOs appear in the night sky.
There were black triangular UFOs over Belgium. People were seeing them everywhere.
Many of them describe the black triangle craft that are reported today, where you have a black triangle craft, multiple lights on the bottom.
30 different sets of witnesses and 3 separate groups of police officers allegedly see black triangular UFOs in the skies above Belgium. Officials question the witnesses for any information that would lead to a rational explanation. But over the next few months, the initial sighting becomes a wave, with over 1,000 sightings reported from November of 1989 through the spring of 1990.
The Belgian Air Force response to that was to actually scramble jets and chase these things.
We always had specialists who could look at things in detail for us, whether it was looking at photos or videos. And of course, the other big part of UFO investigations is radar.
They had F-16s, high-technology jet. They chased these things. They gave chase. They had visual contact. They had radar contact confirmation. And this went on for some time.
The evidence is overwhelming. Something is appearing in the skies. The Belgian government is forced to investigate. But how?
I would always make sure that in our investigations we included the experts, be they civilians or military, who could tell us, firstly, was anything tracked on radar? And secondly, if something was, what can you tell us about it? What I would then try to do is correlate that with something that I knew about or could find out about in terms of aerial activity, astronomical phenomena, etc. So, for example, I would look at flight paths. I would look at military exercises.
On March 30th, 1990, more than 4 months after the initial sightings, a NATO base near Glon, southeast of Brussels, registers an unknown object on radar. 2 F-16s are scrambled to intercept and identify an aerial unknown. One of the jets is able to achieve a radar lock for a few seconds and reports that the object is diamond-shaped.
Radar is not an exact science. Some returns are better than others. So again, that would be a big part, an important part of all government UFO investigations, not just in the British government's UFO project, but in Project Blue Book all around the world.
Many skeptics ask, if the Belgium triangles were so widespread, where is the photographic proof? Many eyewitnesses took photographs, but images are blurred and obscured, prompting one expert to consider the triangles were employing a sophisticated form of infrared jamming. But perhaps this single image of a black triangle captured from video footage taken during the Belgium wave was enough to justify the government's unprecedented investigation.
The Belgian government was actually very responsible. They treated these things as if they were real. They asked the public and ufologists to help them in an investigation of what these things were.
The Belgium UFO wave is an important and rare example of civilians, scientific experts, government officials, and independent UFO investigators collaborating and analyzing evidence.
But also, I guess, showed a little bit of faith that they knew what they were doing, that they were going to bring the truth to the forefront and try and unravel this UFO mystery.
Despite thousands of sightings, radar records, video and photographic evidence, nearly 30 years later, the mystery is still unexplained.
When you see black triangles or you hear about a wave, you can't help but think, is this potentially a testing ground?
Were they U.S.? Were they foreign technology that could represent a national threat to them? Or were they something from elsewhere?
Coming up, 60 years later, a sighting in Chicago, Illinois, has aviation investigators still telling eyewitnesses that seeing is not believing. Alien Files, Unsealed. In the past 7 decades, governments around the world have investigated thousands of UFO sightings and encounters, oftentimes under an umbrella of secrecy. But despite officially denying the existence of UFOs, to this day, many in the public are not convinced.
Each year, when I was working on the UFO project, I probably received 200 or 300 sighting reports, and each of these had to be properly investigated.
Unsealed case file, the O'Hare Airport Flying Disc, Chicago, Illinois, November 7th, 2006. Something unusual appears over one of the nation's busiest airports.
November 2006, 4:15 in the afternoon, an object appears over O'Hare Airport. Aircraft operations are shut down for a while for this object. This thing's sitting over the airport. People are seeing it, people are videoing it, and this thing just sits there.
But what is it? Many eyewitnesses that day described the object as a rotating gray disc, shaped like a frisbee.
It's a round, for want of a better term, flying saucer type spacecraft or craft, and people are looking at it, and then all of a sudden the thing just goes up vertically and punches a hole through the clouds.
The incident is witnessed by ground crew, pilots, passengers, and airline personnel.
It did shut down air operations for a while, but other than that, we didn't have time to scramble jets on it. We didn't really react to it well. We were in shock.
But many are reluctant to go on record and report what they saw.
You have to almost befriend them, or certainly empathize with them, be receptive, put them at ease if they're concerned that we wouldn't take them seriously, concerned that we might think they were wasting their time.
UFO, that's what I think it was. Yeah.
I mean, this happened, it's undeniable, and the Chicago Tribune, to their credit, I believe, put this on the front page, so the mainstream media knew that there was a story here.
The O'Hare UFO receives wide U.S. network media coverage, but the Federal Aviation Administration, the government agency that oversees national safety in our skies, refuses to investigate.
I think because of the ridicule factor, both the airline and indeed the Federal Aviation Administration kind of locked down this whole thing and said, oh, it didn't happen.
Dozens of people saw it. You know, you can't say that this thing didn't happen. It happened.
Authorities conclude that due to the low cloud ceiling that day, conditions were perfect for an atmospheric anomaly.
A skeptical explanation about a weather phenomenon was put forward.
Whatever was witnessed hovering above O'Hare is still, to this day, unexplained.
If you've got something flying in such controlled airspace, well, that's something that should be taken seriously, whether you're a believer or a skeptic.
From studying UFOs for years in the UK, Nick Pope knows that investigations are often abandoned due to lack of data.
In maybe 15% of cases, there was insufficient information, too little data to really come to a definitive conclusion.
Is this the reason the FAA will not investigate UFO sightings?
Why wouldn't they care if a UFO's there? Doesn't mean that it's alien, but it means that it's a threat. So it really kind of begs the question, are they covering up their interest?
Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, many governments claim that they do not investigate UFOs. But those who have witnessed unexplained phenomena in the sky, and many in the media, choose to believe otherwise. In 2011, the Huffington Post asked the Pentagon about a specific passage in the United States Air Force Personnel Manual. Air Force Manual 10-206 included a section on how United States Air Force pilots were to report UFO sightings.
All United States Air Force pilots were instructed and ordered to report any UFO, any unidentified flying object that they saw. This was spelled out in black and white. For years.
Just a few days after the inquiry, the passage was deleted.
Within 24 hours of this major media outlet inquiring to the Pentagon about this manual, it was completely rewritten, it was changed, and the entire chapter on UFOs was completely gone.
There are a couple of reasons why the military are very tight-lipped about UFOs. Firstly, the military are inherently a secretive organization. The default position is always say nothing unless you absolutely have to.
They were going to put the spotlight and show, beyond a reasonable doubt, unidentified flying objects was still on the books to be reported as Air Force pilots see them.
The second point is that as a hierarchical organization, it's actually very easy to clamp down on this. Because if a senior officer says, don't talk about UFOs, that's an order. And all sorts of adverse consequences will befall anyone who disobeys that. And that's why over the years, the military has been very able to keep a lot of this secret.
Pentagon officials claim it was a coincidence that the passage was deleted at the time of the inquiry.
Why is there this big charade that they're not interested in anything related to UFOs? And in black and white, under the Freedom of Information Act, you can completely prove the opposite.
We may never know exactly what kinds of UFO phenomena governments around the globe have investigated.
This is not an area I can discuss in any great detail, of course, because I'm still bound by the British government's Official Secrets Act. What I can say is that through intelligence means, those of us in government have a pretty good idea of the sorts of things that are out there.
The question is, what exactly is out there? Alien Files, Unsealed.